there's an organization that has notices going out. They've got 30% of listings in a certain area are office exclusives. And I'm like, I hope the DOJ takes them down. Like, that's where I want them to focus their attention, because that's the kind of stuff that makes just everything look bad. It's just not good. There's nothing positive. You talk about it privately. We talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, James Dwiggins, along with my co-host, Mr. Crazy Uncle Robinson. I'm going to change the name every time just to make it weird. So
okay, all right.
Just roll with it. This is going to be new.
Yeah,
we're changing things up. So
you can call me whatever you want. Just don't call me late for dinner.
Tell us about our guest, Lisa Sturtevant, the chief economist for Bright MLS, and tell everybody about this crazy podcast we just had.
It was awesome. You know, I'm an economics nerd, so anytime we get an economist on, I have a good time. Of course, she dug into data on data on data. She talked about the importance of communication, and she unpacked two powerful reports that Bright MLS has put together, expanding and explaining the difference between properties that were on and off MLS. You will be shocked at what they found. Not shocked at the discovery, shocked at the size of what they discovered.
Yeah, the price specifically.
The price, yeah, the difference in price.
Yeah.
It was mind-boggling, candidly.
Yeah.
And they also did another report on the relationship between agent commissions and the impact that that has or does not have on the sales process. Two wonderful studies. Everyone should read them. There is information that should be in your buyer and listing consultations in these reports.
And it's all about the myth of steering, and they completely debunked it. So you have got to pay attention to this podcast and share it. It's pretty incredible stuff.
There's going to be a conversation that you're going to have with clients, and they give you all of the information that you need to have a thoughtful one. It's great.
Tune in, kids. It's going to be a great show.
Put it in your ears.
Lisa, welcome to the podcast. We are very excited to have you here because Keith and I are data nerds. Actually, Keith is more of a data nerd than I am. But these two reports that we're going to talk about today, these studies, we have both read front to back, and we are excited to get into these reports because, man, do these things go in deep about just countering the narrative out in the mainstream media, and certainly the DOJ and the plaintiffs' lawyers. I mean, you guys did some incredible work on it. So before we dive in, I wanted to let the viewers and listeners just hear about your background. Just tell them kind of who you are, your current role, your educational background, and then we'll dive into a couple rapid fires just to get everybody to know you a little bit on a personal level. And then we have like 55 questions we want to ask.
311 questions.
So we'll start with your background. Tell everybody who you are and what you do, et cetera. So
I will. And I have to say, thank you so much for having me here. And the fact that we're going to have like a data nerd geek out today, yes. I'm like super excited. I am currently serving as chief economist with Bright MLS. Bright MLS is one of the nation's largest multiple listing services. And our footprint covers 6 mid-Atlantic states and DC, from New Jersey down to Virginia, about 100,000 subscribers, about $122 billion in transactions last year across the footprint. I've been doing this kind of stuff, research on housing, economics, the demographics, sort of how they all interplay. Now, gosh, it's been like 25 years now. I got interested in this idea of housing actually when I was buying my first house, and I was doing my PhD at George Mason University, and I got really interested in this idea of why people choose to live where they live. And so I did my dissertation on that, sort of like how people decide where to live, how demographics and economic factors affect that. And then since then, just have been doing a lot of work on the intersection of the economy, the housing market, trying to sort of do research that can be presented really clearly, that can help move the industry forward, and that can help agents, brokers, lenders really be a resource to all the home buyers and sellers out there.
I love it. And there's so much data that you guys have access to. I mean, to some degree, and we'll dig into this. I mean, a lot of, like, Keith and I have been doing this a really long time, and a lot of MLS data was always behind the closed door. Like, you just didn't really know much of anything that was going on. Sure. And I love the fact that we're starting to get to a place where we're exposing things, because really you have a repository of data that just is infinite on how things are transacted and, numbers. And when you look at all of that data, you can come up with some really interesting statistics out of it.
Totally. Yeah. And we're going to do so much more of that. We just didn't have the resources before, but now that I came on board, I got a couple of people and we're eager to do more and more of this kind of stuff. So stay tuned for sure.
And the importance level too is so much higher, right? As we continue to evolve the role of a real estate professional, the ability to have proprietary data insights that we can provide to our clients, right? Like that's going to become paramount as a lot of the general data has sort of become ubiquitous and commoditized, right, between the various portals. The ability to have insights earlier and proprietary will be meaningful and significant. So,
and we can make decisions that are based upon actual facts instead of just conjecture, which is a lot of this stuff's happening. Let's do just 2 real quick rapid fire questions for you that Keith and I always like to ask our guests. This is just for people to get to know you a little bit. I'll start with the first one and Keith will go with the second, and we'll dive into all the studies. So I'm curious. So your favorite book or podcast this year, being the fact that you're an economist and love data. So
I'm writing this one down.
Yeah, so this is maybe not a surprising answer, but I read Limitless by Gina Smielek. She's a reporter at the New York Times, all about the history of the Fed and in particular how the Federal Reserve's role changed since the financial crisis back in 2008, and actually explains a lot, frankly, about why we are where we are in the housing market and how interest rates have had this really strange and outside effect on both the economy and the housing market. So great read, highly recommend it. Limitless.
It's really, really good. I mean, it's helpful if you happen to be a data nerd, but it's written. You don't have to be to fully enjoy the read.
Absolutely.
Did you ever read Creature from Jekyll Island, the semi-conspiracy theory book about the Fed?
No, gosh. All right. I'm making a note.
Actually, I will send you a copy. I
will wait for it.
You know, Keith, I just realized we should add a page to our website. That's all the book recommendations from our guests. Now that I think
that's
about
a
I
great
love that
idea.
idea.
I just was thinking, like, I've had people asking, I was like, we need to create a list of all the books our guests have recommended. So
we could just look at my Amazon order cart. But
right? It's true. And I had to decide. I had a long list to choose from, so I would love to add to your list and
the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered Book Club.
Reading
list. Reading list. Yeah. All right, Keith.
Okay. The next get to know your rapid fire question. If you could have lunch with one person, current or historical, who would it be and why?
So this might be a disappointing answer.
Nonsense.
But
no way. It's your answer. It's going to be great.
My son has been away at college all year and he's coming home in May in just a couple of weeks. And so right now, the one person I want to have lunch with more than anything in the world is my 20-year-old son.
Hell yeah, it is.
As he's gone, we have talked, I think, more since he's been away at school than we did when he was home, right? And just this idea of him becoming this person, this like really interesting person that I would want to hang out with, even if I wasn't related to him. So
and
I'm looking forward.
You guys can have a beer together. So that's pretty.
And
exactly,
by the way, that might actually be one of the best answers we've had.
Really
not that we get to judge, but like the fact that you're like, I just want to see my kid and have lunch with him is just that's
our podcast. We absolutely get.
You're right. We get to judge the hell we want to. So
that's the rule.
Yeah, as someone with a preteen daughter, she's 12, going on like 19. No, I absolutely like that resonated with me so deeply. Totally. The idea of just having lunch with your child. That's a great answer.
Yeah. And I was telling James, I have an 8-year-old or 9-year-old now daughter as well. So the distance between 9 and 20, it goes like that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like this hanging on to it is really important.
What's that old line? The days are long, but the years are fast.
Totally.
Yeah.
Or the other way. The days, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got these 2 studies and a short amount of time to cover a lot of questions. Before
we start, we will link these in the show notes.
Oh, thank you,
Keith. Make sure that you have access to these. So you're going to be listening super hard. Just know that you can go down in the show notes, click the links. You'll have access to all of this stuff. So sorry, James.
Yeah, no, it's good. And for anybody who's paying attention and hates the narrative of what we're doing, go read them. Thank you.
Yeah.
So...
it's
Monday.
Our listeners' homework.
Yeah, I did. So,
all right.
All right, so let's start with this. So I'm going to take the on MLS study. Keith's going to grab the dispelling myths about real estate commissions in the MLS study. And the reason why we do this is I'm really passionate about this study that you did.
Yeah.
I'm extraordinarily vocal about the value of MLS and specifically my issues with keeping listings off the MLS. I have been very vocal on stages around the country that I'm not in favor of it. I think it's important to have sellers' properties exposed to the biggest marketplace possible. I was looking for data on this stuff, and then randomly I was talking to Brian, and Brian's like, "We have a study we did on that, James. You should read it." So, and it went out last year, right? So you guys did this study, this on MLS study last year. And I didn't see it, so it didn't get as much attention as I hoped it would. Now that we're exposing it, we'll get a lot of attention. So let's start there. Tell us about this study, and why did you guys decide to do it? So let's start with that question.
Yeah, so this is last year was actually the second year we conducted this study that we call the on MLS study. Awesome. We're in the process of updating it, so it'll come out. Last year it came out the end of July. It'll come out again at the end of July this year. And the whole purpose was really to sort of do what you said, James, is to bring some data around this question about what value the multiple listing service plays. And this was sort of part of a larger discussion just to kind of inform people in general about what the MLS is. If you ask people, they think it's Major League Soccer, right? They don't know what MLS is, right?
Didn't you guys just sign Messi?
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. They're like, yes. And that's how the conversation tends to go. But the idea was, we were seeing, as you pointed out, we were seeing more listings that were being held off the MLS. These weren't necessarily for sale by owners. These were, agents and brokers who were holding listings off and marketing them within their firm. The market was so hot, it was really easy to do that. And so, we wanted to not just say, well, you have to use the MLS. We wanted to say there's a value in using the MLS, and here it is. And so we were able to combine our multiple listing service data with public records data to track both sales that transacted on MLS with those that transacted off MLS, and then to compare outcomes and say, like, if you took two otherwise similar properties, is it a better deal to list your home on the MLS? And
all right, I'm going to break that down to James layman terms. Please. So on MLS deals that you could track everything, then you went to off record. So essentially county records to figure out similar properties. give me an idea of analysis so that everybody who's going to try and dispel everything we just said, like explain how that analysis worked. So
in the county level public records, which we have for our 68 counties in our footprint, we're able to see recordations of deed transfers, right? Yep. So we can see when something happens. And then we put all of those transfers through a filtering process to try and identify true arm's length transactions, right? So we don't want those records where somebody's name was misspelled and so they're reissuing the deed, or where it was a transfer from a family member, right? From one family member to another. So there's a whole series of filters that look at the sales price, that look at the time on market, or the date of the transactions. We see deeds transfers that happen twice on the same day, and we know something's going on there. We omitted any sort of transactions that looked like they were flips because we wanted real arm's length transactions. So any transaction that was within 12 months of each other on the same property, same parcel ID. Okay. And then we were able to match all that public records data back to the MLS and basically look for it on the MLS. Did that transfer that we're seeing in the public records transact on MLS? And if we find it, we say yay. And if it didn't, we call that an off MLS transaction.
How many records were you going through?
We started with about 2.5 million public records, and then the final analysis had a little under 1.5 million records in the analysis over a 4-year period.
Interesting.
Can I ask one high level question, just in case there's a naysayer that's out there?
Oh, sure.
Right. There's probably someone listening who would think, well, shocker, and MLS did a study that said MLSs are important, right?
Totally.
So if someone were thinking that, how would you, I think you're doing a very good job initially by talking about the breadth of the data that you you looked at. But before we get into the specifics, which are coming up next, how would you answer someone who were like, yeah, shocker, you guys did a study and said you were important?
Sure, that's fair. There's a couple of different ways I can answer this, but I think I'll start with this way. I'm really interested in answering questions where I'm I'm not trying to like gotcha moment anybody. I'm trying to sort of decide, does something logically make sense to me? And so in my mind, before you get to any math or statistics or data or anything, doesn't it make sense that the more eyeballs you have on a property, right, when it's available to a broader number of people, wouldn't it make sense sort of with Econ 101 that you would have more people looking, more demand, and then that would then generate the best offer, the most competitive
for
offer.
people that think theory, logically, right? Yes. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's to put it really into Econ 101, it's, you know, if supply stays the same, which it is, and demand would go up because of more eyeballs, that should put upward pressure on price, right? That's the 101.
But I will tell you one thing is when I came to Bright, Bright had done this study before, but they had just done just averages. They just looked at the averages off versus the averages on. And I said, well, we can't do that. I said, because what if the properties that are kept off the MLS, maybe they're crappy, right? Maybe they're really bad. Maybe they're really hard to market. So that's why it looks like the MLS is doing a really good job. So I said, well, let's do it again, but let's use a different method so that we can account for all of those differences and then have a true apples to apples comparison. Because I wasn't frankly satisfied with the first study that Bright did because I don't think it answered the question correctly. So I was prepared to say, hey, I want to answer this. Let's take a look and do this sort of in a more sophisticated way. Deeper. And that's where we ended up.
Great answer. Thank you for that.
Well, and it's also, to me, it sounds like you're also wanting to be transparent about things. And if it was different, that would also be interesting data to look at. I mean, I would be almost improbable that it would be, but in theory, it's good to get the data. And I think, well, I mean, we're going to get into this, but it's the percentages that blew my mind. Was like, whoa, that was some serious numbers, and
it was a meaningful difference.
Meaningful, right?
It was a meaningful number. So let's do a couple of things before we dive into that. So, so since 2019, it seems like that in general, there's been an uptick of share of properties in the MLS. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, and I'll be, I would characterize it as the increase kind of bumped around a little bit over the last few years. And I frankly, and again, I'm happy to admit when I'm proven wrong, I expected that maybe we would see a smaller share of listings on MLS during the kind of frenzy days of the pandemic, right? When you just had to like breathe and you could get a buyer for your house. Yeah. But I think what we found is there was just a lot of complications during the pandemic, what with being able to, people don't want folks coming through their house.
Right.
The sort of process of managing multiple offers got really hard. So I think that even in this very fast-paced market, sellers and their representatives were seeing the value of having this property listed where it could go through sort of a more orderly process and kind of manage the showings and manage the offers. There are some areas where we did see the share of on MLS listings that were lower. And I think, in our report, we found, for example, the city of Baltimore, if you're familiar with Baltimore City, there were a much smaller share of listings that were listed on the MLS. And it's also a neighborhood where there was a lot of redevelopment and a lot of investor activity, a lot of really poor quality housing that was being purchased both by for-profit and nonprofit developers. And I think that accounts for why we saw it different in Baltimore, but across most of the rest of the region, we saw a very strong showing.
Do you think that had anything to do with clear cooperation policy as well, since that was enacted in 2020?
Yeah, I think so. Although we didn't see a big jump in 2019 to 2020. So I'm not sure if I'm not sure the extent to which that
had any
impacted, but certainly since then.
It'd be interesting to see since clear cooperation policy was enacted in 2020 to now, as an example, like what percentage of properties are on MLS, and then going back and going and doing a previous study to see how much of an impact that's had. Just an interesting stat. I'm going to get the first year wrong, but I know FSBO was at the lowest level ever. Last year in 2023, it was 7% of the entire U.S. market.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to say it was like 1981. It was 15%, somewhere right around there. But I remember the 2023 at 7. It was the lowest amount they've ever had. Which goes to show you that people want to have representation. But anyways, So you don't think clear cooperation? We covered Baltimore. We were going to ask that question. So tell us. So So give us some of the juicy details. What did you find out about homes on the MLS and percentages and all of that? What did the research show?
Yeah. So what we did, as I mentioned, is we had identified homes that were marketed, listed, and sold on the MLS, and we had homes that were sold and transacted without being listed on the MLS. And we also had a whole range of characteristics about those homes, right? The MLS has lots of great data about properties because agents want to make sure they're showcasing all the characteristics, and there's stuff we have to collect. Let's be very clear. Public records data does not have data on, whether there's a built-in TV room
granite
and
countertops and a theater room, and
exactly. So we were limited to the property characteristics by what's collected in the public records data as opposed to what's in the MLS, because we needed consistent data. But given that, we were able to account for the size of the home, how much the square footage of the home. We were able to account for the type, single family, condo, that sort of thing. We were able to account for how old the home was. We were able to account for where it was, which is really important because we were able to connect all sorts of demographic data to characterize the neighborhood. The upshot of that is what we're able to say is if you have two otherwise similar homes, we were able to estimate the sold price and the difference between that home being listed on MLS versus off MLS. And in the latest study, there was about a $54,000 difference over the 4-year period, which means that sellers who list their home on MLS get higher offers, more competitive offers than other sellers with similar properties do when they market and sell their home off the MLS.
So I was reading it's on average 13.3% higher from 2019 to 2023. Is that correct?
It depends. Yeah, sometimes I quote an individual year as opposed to the whole 3.
Let's just say it was significant at $54,000. What was the average price home that you were working off of with that?
So during the period, the average price home was about $320,000.
And when I looked at the report, it seemed like it was accelerating. Like the delta was getting bigger as we got closer to 2023. And the disparity was getting larger. Is that?
Yeah, and it is fair. And we always the first quarter of 2023 data we should take with a grain of salt. First quarter data were a little bit incomplete. We will be reporting out again, but even through 2022, we saw that the difference was still significant and was still pretty important.
Is there any of this that you think is, I don't know, a delicate way to say it, and I'm not a delicate person, so I won't try, but
just say it.
Yeah. Is there quality of agent? I mean, I guess we're going to dig in on why, right? But is there a quality of agent effect here that someone who is willing to take a listing and try to sell it off market maybe is also less responsive and some of the other things that are required to have a successful and fluid market, a dynamic market where the homeowner gets maximum value?
You say you're not a delicate person.
That was the most delicate way of saying what I wanted to say, which is, I think it's agent greed?
I was working so hard, I'm not sweating. So that was not easy, just for the record.
It's the most delicate I've ever heard you be in 57 episodes or whatever we're on.
I have an easy way out. We didn't investigate the brokerage, the agent. We didn't investigate any measure of agent or broker quality, or what we did was what we were testing was the theory that when a property gets more eyes through the MLS, there is a benefit to the seller.
Well, okay. So I'm not going to be delicate.
I should have just asked James.
It was actually, so I was at a conference and some people won't like what I'm going to say, but Rich Barton was on stage. I admire him. We don't agree on everything, but one thing that I will advocate that Zillow's always tried to do is push the envelope of consumer transparency. They are, no matter what anybody says, they're constantly trying to provide more information to consumers and give them insights into stuff. And he made this comment, and it was like, look, he was basically saying the direction that the antitrust lawyers and the DOJ are taking things is not helpful to consumers. This is not the direction you want to go. He was basically saying, look, we need to make sure we have a fair and transparent marketplace. And I know that benefits Zillow. I understand why he said it, but still the point's valid. I am not shy about the fact that when organizations intentionally have an off-market program to double end deals to increase their profit, that is screwing sellers. The end. Yeah. That's what it does. Well, it's not helpful to sell. I don't care what anybody says. Well, it's Taylor Swift's house and she doesn't want it on the MLS. Okay. That's
Why did you use Taylor Swift?
I don't know. It's the only thing I think of again.
Funny, her childhood home is in the Bright MLS footprint.
Oh, well, there's that. So you can't use that. You can't use that excuse anymore.
It was on the MLS.
That is also not the reason James used Taylor Swift.
Stop it.
Yeah, what? But in addition to that point, I would also reveal that when we did our research on these types of off MLS, particularly office exclusive listings, there are also very important fair housing issues related to this, right? And so, yeah, I think that there'll be some people who will really, what you just said will really resonate with them. And then there's other folks who, particularly our friends in government, who will be really need to understand what the implications are if only certain kinds of people who are connected to certain kinds of people can see homes that are available for sale.
Yeah.
Stop it with your logic.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm nothing if not logical. And so there was a study in Houston that showed that this practice of pocket listings reinforced residential segregation on the ground, where there were networks that were disproportionately leaving people of color out of the housing market. And in our market, in the Bright MLS footprint, our office exclusive listings are a relatively small share of the transactions in the market, but they are disproportionately more likely to be in neighborhoods that are have a higher share of white folks and a higher income in those neighborhoods. And that suggests to me that there's potential also for residential segregation problems.
I mean, this shit just pisses me off because this is the kind of stuff that causes the investigations that occur into our business. And brokers have a responsibility. Every single one of them.
It's called a fiduciary responsibility.
Literally. To protect consumers, and that's our freaking job. And it's just absolutely insane to me that there's an organization that has notices going out. They've got 30% of listings in a certain area are office exclusives. And I'm like, I hope the DOJ takes them down. Like, that's where I want them to focus their attention, because that's the kind of stuff that makes just everything look bad. It's just not good. There's nothing positive. Like, and $54,000 is a lot of money. The administration's ranting about housing costs and ranting about all of these things, and people paying too much in compensation. Well, let's look at the things that are actually causing issues with this stuff. That's where we should be focusing our attention. The whole industry should.
So I'm going to ask a question of both of you. So why then? So the lawsuit, not to make this about the DOJ lawsuit, because I know we're here to talk about your studies, but there's a specific carve out for marketing your properties with compensation to your brokerage internally. Why? Like, why is that in there?
I'll answer first. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not a lawyer. I find the whole thing really confusing, because the more I hear about it, the more the goal was transparency, and it's just creating a really problematic environment if you're a home buyer right now. And it's much more complicated, and it's going to be more time consuming, which is more, you don't talk about this, but more time is money. That's an expression, right? Yep. But it's a more expensive transaction if you're going to add up the amount of time now that's going to be involved.
Yeah.
In this whole thing. So I don't know the answer.
And what's interesting, I was having this conversation with my uncle actually this weekend, and was explaining everything to him. And I said, the way to actually have solved all of this was if the DOJ just went and the lawyers just wanted to make it so that there was a mandatory buyer rep at first point of contact with a buyer, establish fiduciary at the point in time, negotiate your fee there, then the whole thing would have been fine, because the buyer's agent would have agreed to compensation based upon their worth that the buyer agrees to. And then the whether a seller offers it or not is an irrelevant part, but you still leave, if somebody wants to, in this country, if somebody wants to incentivize, so the DOJ understands the word, it's different. If they want to incentivize somebody to help buy their house because they have a need or desire to get rid of it faster, or whatever they want to do, they should have a right to do that. And it should be transparent, to your point, and on the MLS where all the other data is. And then it doesn't matter from steering, because it was already the buyer's agent and the buyer pre-negotiated their fee in advance. problem solved. But you're 100% right in that this just makes things messy. It's like, well, we can advertise it on my social media post and on my personal website and my company website, but I can't put it on the portals and I can't put it in the MLS. And I got to call everybody and ask them if there's anything. Is there not anything? Is there a secret code? Do I have like a, like what? It's just stupid. Like, I don't actually get it.
It's going to devolve into each area sort of coming up with their own standard of practice for how you gather this information when it's offer writing time.
And I want to be clear with my statements. I'm not ragging on NAR with this. This is the DOJ has been very public about decoupling. I'm pointing the finger at a 3-letter organization, not the other one.
They're both 3-letter.
I got it. I said that and then I realized that. I was like, well, shit, that backfired. So
the one with a D. The one with a D.
All right. So we covered we want to get into this commission study.
Before we move on though, I do want to pin this like hard and into the ground. Go. Somewhere between 13 and 17% properties that were off market sold for less than somewhere between 13 and 17% of properties that were, I'm sorry, not off market, but off MLS sold for less than. That's not a small number. I was shocked. I figured it would be less. I had no idea. If you would have asked me before I read the report, like, what do you think? I probably would have said, 5% less.
Sure.
I would have been off by a factor of 3 in my assumptions. Like, it is meaningful and significant. I would make this part of my listing presentation. I would make this part of my conversation that I had with sellers. That I remember meeting with sellers and they would say, well, it's kind of inconvenient. I don't want everyone to know my business. And I would always say, so long as you're comfortable getting less money for your home, I'm comfortable with exploring that as an option. And immediately they'd be like, well, I'm not that uncomfortable with it. Right? You've got to put it in the proper lens. We all would love less inconvenience. We would all love a little more privacy. Those two things are natural human instincts, but so is optimizing your return on your investment. And when those two clash, most people pick optimizing the return on their investment.
And by the way, just I'll add one comment, Lisa, and you can wrap us up. We'll go to the next thing. I'm not going to name who they are, but I had conversations with 2 other MLS executives last week who've done similar studies. The low end, Keith, was 7% in another MLS, and then another one was 10%, and then Bright's 13 to 17. All meaningful numbers. Yeah.
And the only thing I'll add too is, we only presented for our major regions, but these results were across every local market, every county we looked at. It wasn't like it was just in the big cities or just in the big suburbs. It was across markets. The other thing I'll say is when we did look at those office exclusive listings, what we found is 2/3 of those listings that started as office exclusives ultimately were listed on the MLS, which meant that seller not only was potentially losing out on money, but they lost out on time of the order of 18 days. And because there was this sense that, it wasn't working by marketing.
Interesting. Well, I love the part that Keith said about this should be something that people put in their listing presentations. It should be a requirement that's in there, in my opinion, but we'll figure that out in time, I'm sure. All right, Keith, take us away on the other. On the other report.
You did another really interesting study, sort of dispelling the myths of real estate commissions. Let's just start high level.
Sure.
Why did you decide to do this study? Like, what were you trying to ferret out from the information here?
So I'd actually been thinking about it the week of March 11th, this idea. March 15th, as you know, is when the proposed NAR settlement came down. But I think it was the 3rd or 4th time that I kept reading this headline about how the offer of buyer agent compensation leads agents to steer their clients to certain types of properties. And again, Keith, I was starting with logic. I'm like, so there's 2 things coming out of the conversation. The first is online portals are changing the market and we don't need real estate agents anymore because everybody's seeing their home online. And then in the next breath, they're saying, but agents are steering. And my thought was, if we're seeing everything online, how does a potential real estate agent say, oh, you can't see those?
Like how would that conversation even happen, by the way? I mean, I went down that thought process, like the client's like, hey, I saw this property on realtor.com. And they're like, oh yeah, you can't see that. Well,
you can't see
why?
that.
It's for sale. Because
what do you mean I can't see that?
It's not.
Right.
Yeah.
So it didn't make any sense to me. And so in the litigation where this issue had come up, there was repeatedly, time after time, cited this study that was conducted between 1998 and 2011 in Massachusetts.
I'm sorry, just time frames. I want to repeat that one more time. When was it?
1998 to 2011 in Massachusetts.
So like before the internet, basically.
Before the internet. Right.
I mean, not really, but you know.
No, but there wasn't. Zillow started in 2005. It just got going and didn't even have homes for sale on it to begin with. So like we're talking very pre-internet popularity of search. Yeah. Okay.
For sure. For sure. And so I thought, well, that's irrelevant, right? Was sort of my takeaway. Right. But it was in the case, I'm not a lawyer, but that's all that was being talked about. And I thought, well, we have data. Let's actually see what happened over the last 4 years. 6 states plus DC, 1.1 million transactions between 2000 and 2023. We have the offer of buyer agent compensation. That's a field in the MLS, right? That's at the heart of this steering. People say, oh, they can see it. All right, well, I can see it. So let's see what happens. And my thought was, if agents are steering based on the offer of compensation, then when there's a lower offer, those homes are going to take a lot longer to sell, right? Because they're going to, and we just frankly didn't see that at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't happening.
I want to dig into the findings. There were 4 real key findings that you had. But I want you to frame up one more time for the audience because it's so important. I think, too, one of the things I always look at when a study comes out is the depth and breadth and size of the data, right? Because it's very easy to take small data sets and tell any story you want, right? And that is not what you and your team did. You guys, it was, I think, 68 counties, it
was over 1 million
cities. Yeah, it was cities and rural. Like it covered a deep swath. So can you give us the data sets again real quick just to frame it up?
Yeah. No, 100%. Look, I love data all day long.
I asked an economist to talk about data sets. Yeah, she's not mad.
Our footprint, the Bright MLS footprint covers what we call 68 primary counties, right, in 6 states and DC. And so we had data on all on MLS transactions over a 4-year period, 2020 through 2023. Which totaled 1.06 million transactions over that 4-year period. And so that's the data set we started with. There we had to, there's a little bit of data cleaning in there, but when we came down to it, we're still at over 1 million transactions that we used to conduct the analysis, where we looked at the relationship between the offer of compensation and other outcomes for these listings.
And these were of the recent years, not like back before we invented the wheel, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because, I think that's what's getting lost here is, the market operates the way it does because of supply and demand fundamentals. Yeah. And so we're talking about this thing in the abstract, like we're all making these decisions out in like the universe with no oxygen, but people are reacting to what is on the ground, right? And so I wanted to do something that was relevant to what was happening on there.
All right. So fact number 1. Oh, did you have something you want to say?
I'm stuck on how did we get to this? I guess I'm stuck on 2 things. Number 1 is how did we're using a study from 1998 to 2011 to support a position they've been very vocal about. Was there another study, or
Yeah. So then there were 2 studies. The second study was done more recently, right? And it was based on page views on an online portal, and the idea that if the offer of buyer agent compensation was lower, we actually saw fewer page views of these listings on this online real estate portal.
I'm sorry. I'm not. It's Monday. So page views on a portal, meaning where buyers go look at things.
Yes.
And they determined that was not the agent looking at it, buyers looking at it.
Right. And the reason why that's problematic, of course, is because on this online portal, consumers can't filter by buyer agent compensation, right? And there was this idea that the agents could be, forwarding listings and they could be looking at certain listings. But to me, it just didn't make any sense because it wasn't the actual transaction. It wasn't showing the property. It wasn't like a buyer asking to see the property. It was viewing online, and it didn't seem like it made sense.
I'm genuinely completely confused right now. What relevance does that have to do with anything? If you're trying to show that there was steering, you need records of what agents were sending you through the MLS, not online portals. That makes no logical sense to me at all.
Well, shocker, the plaintiff's attorneys are cherry picking studies to tell their story, right? But
and honestly, I did a deep dive because I wanted to see, look, somebody else must have studied this, was my theory. I'm always like, I said this when I joined Bright. I'm not going to be an advocate. I'm not going to just
You're going to do your job.
Party line, whatever. Yeah. So I was like, somebody else must have done this. And there wasn't any other study out there. So when we talk about cherry pick, these are the only two things that they could
by the
really
way,
use
that's our fault. Like, to be clear, I have no problem saying that. Our industry should have been years ago doing these studies and communicating this stuff out. I'm not blaming. Thank you for doing it. And we're responsible for part of this outcome for not publicizing information or doing those studies or even inviting people in to do them with us so that there's no question
parties.
It's done by an outside party. It wasn't just us. Like, you can look at the data yourself. That's just very disappointing, by the way, in general. That
I will say something too, and I know I'm a little biased because I'm a researcher, but we discuss things a lot by anecdote, and anecdote can get us into a lot of trouble. And we always have, our cousins, brothers, sister-in-law did this or that, and I feel like that's what we get caught up in, and I think we need more evidence-backed, data-backed research as opposed and less anecdotes.
And oftentimes the anecdote is the outlier, right?
Right.
There are outliers
because you remember it.
Yeah, because you don't remember the one that is in the thick middle of the bell curve. You only remember the ones that are at the extreme edges.
All right, Keith, take us in.
All right, winding back to Real Estate Commission study, big, broad data set was covered. Fact one: compensation and days on market. Right. Just unpack what you discovered there for us, because you can articulate it better than I can.
Well, so again, I always start with the logic, right? The argument says when you offer a lower compensation to the buyer's agent, they're not going to show their clients that house. So in my mind, I was like, well, that means that it would take a lot longer to sell. And so what we looked was, let's compare, let's do a little correlation, a little association between that offer of buyer agent compensation and the length of time that a property stays on the market. And if we expected that narrative to be correct, we would see a negative relationship. Higher offers of compensation, faster time of sale, like quicker days on market.
Or the inverse, meaning lower offer of compensation, longer days on market.
Exactly. And across years, across states, across property types, with a very detailed multivariate analysis, which we can dig into a little bit, we found no such relationship between days on market and offer of buyer agent compensation.
In fact, it was either weak to slightly positive, correct?
It was weak to slightly positive, And that suggests to me that if you were thinking about it, that maybe that offer was a little higher for those that it took a little longer to sell, which kind of makes sense, right? You need more help. And so you're going to offer a little bit more so that agent would bring more buyers in because the house is a little bit trickier to sell.
One of the data sets we can't grab but would be useful is how many offers were written on a property. That gets,
Love that. I would love that. We do a survey every month of folks who worked with a buyer seller, and we know still that folks are putting in 2.4 on average, 2.4 offers before they're successful. But I would love to dig into what it is about.
Another comment is in the study, you're looking at offers of compensation, but you don't actually know what the final commission was either.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we do. We have one field, and all we have is the offer of compensation to the buyer's agent. We don't have the commission to the seller's agent. We don't have the final amount paid because that gets negotiated as the transaction goes. We only have that offer, but that was the signal, right?
I get it.
The lawyers,
your studies, that data field's accurate for your study. My only comment is the steering conversation and like this narrative of this 6% commission that doesn't exist and hasn't since 1991 is actually even more irrelevant when you think about. So Real Trends tracked this for a long time. Steve Murray's group did until basically last year. I think the average commission in the United States in 2022 was 5.34. And they haven't tracked it after that, but it had been coming down for a long time. But even then, in the MLS, you don't see what the agent negotiated. If there was concessions, if the agent gave up compensation or they made changes along the way, which by the way happened in like almost every real estate transaction. There's something that's different from the original offer. Not to take you off track, but so you couldn't find any correlation at all.
That's correct. We couldn't find the negative correlation that would have been expected. In fact, it was a little bit positive.
Which is, to me, what this tells you, it's giving you gravitational pull, right? My dad's a mathematical physicist, so I tend to look at this is giving you which way it is or isn't pulling. Right. And so, of course, we could find the outlier use case study like we were just talking about for either side of these arguments. I'm sure there are some properties that where, it was high compensation and really short days on market. And I'm sure that the inverse is also true. But the beauty of looking at a million different data points is you get the general sense, and there's very weak gravitational pull between compensation and days on market.
Correct.
Right. And so, I mean,
for the agent in this concept of steering that the DOJ keeps referring to.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see, by the way, gravitational, I'm using keys, we're fancy words now, gravitational pull thanks, buddy. In a post decoupled world, and then how much that actually has an impact as well. And I candidly think it will show a significant impact if the buyer cannot afford representation, by the way.
No, your studies now are on my must read every year list.
Literally.
So if I could get on the email distribution list, like holler at your boy, okay? Because I want them.
But, and I mean, you're bringing up, James, you bring up exactly, what I'm watching now. We our subscribers are, we're creating new fields in the MLS. There's going to be new ways to, and it's not going to be, the data they're going to be messy, but we're going to try and do the best we can to sort of see, look, what's happening out there and how is it affecting consumers?
All right, let's go to fact number 2, commissions and price.
Okay.
What was the correlation and the relationship there between commission and price? Fact number 2 in your report.
Okay. So look, home prices are high, right? Affordability is hit its worst level in history last year. It is tempting to want to blame somebody. I get it. It is tempting to want to point a finger at someone or an industry. And so the narrative had been that it is the fact that real estate agents get paid for their work. That's the reason why home prices are as high as they are. So similar to the days on market, the thought exercise was, okay, if an offer of compensation to a buyer's agent is higher, then the seller's going to list their price for more, their home for more, because they need to cover that, right? And so what we did was we looked at the relationship, the correlation between the offer of compensation and the original list price of a home.
Okay.
And we would have expected there to be a positive relationship. The gravitational pull would have been positive if that narrative had been true. And in fact, we found the reverse. Again, we found a weak negative relationship between the offer of compensation and the list price, even after you control for other factors related to the house, how big it was, how old it was, where it was located. And so it just doesn't conform to this idea that mortgage rates and supply is what determines.
Shocker. Mortgage rates and supply are what drive affordability. Right. But just to unpack this one a little further. So the commission being higher, you would then assume that the list price would be higher. Is that what you were testing?
That is what was being, that's what was being talked about.
Gotcha. And then if the list price was lower, you would assume that the commission would also be lower.
But the price still was listed based upon what the market was willing to pay.
Right. And that's so basically the upside.
Yeah. So strange.
I'm pretty sure I learned that in high school.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, this is basic supply and demand.
It is.
I'm not being dismissive of your economic prowess, by the way.
No. But that's part of it. There is no economic prowess there. I'm not anything special here. This is just sort of like, and I think that one of the things that I was just challenged by was the fact that there was all this narrative that commissions are going to drop by 30%, and who knows, maybe. Yeah, sure. But then there was some people twisting the headlines, and home prices were going to start to collapse. Yeah. And home prices are priced to reflect market conditions, and I couldn't see it.
And by the way, if you want to we could just summarize all of this is why home prices are where they are, and most of it just comes down to the United States Treasury. I mean, we can go on a whole different conversation on that, but
supply
a big part of it, but also just the sheer cost of how much money's been put into the market, and the list goes on and on. So you basically defunct that narrative as well through the study.
I do think there
same
could be
same data set, just to be clear, 60.
Same data set.
Okay. All these are all these facts were based off of the same data set. Couldn't there be an effect though too, where you're more experienced? Like in general, this is again painting with a broad brush, but your higher end listings tend to be done more often by your more experienced agents. Your more experienced agents are probably better at the craft. You get better at things over time. So couldn't that be part of the effect where you've got more experienced, I don't want to say better, but I'll call them better agents, and they're going to be better at negotiating commission and better at the price conversation with a client, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's where we need to go. That's where I'd like to go next with some of our research is, because I do think right now it is more important that agents, particularly buyer's agents, also listing agents, are demonstrating their value. And if you are good at what you do, you need to make sure people know about it because people are willing to pay for value. That's one of the things we found in our other research.
Say that last part again for the people in the back, just in case they were changing lanes in traffic.
Yeah. So, people are willing to pay for value. But I think what we found is that, and as you all know, agents and brokers haven't always done a good job of talking about it.
And they've done it from a servant's heart approach. They haven't done it right. Like so many real estate professionals think it's their job to insulate their client from the stress of the transaction. And so they actually have for decades thought they were doing the right thing by pushing down the stress level and not exposing their client to that, right? Like when you go out to a very nice dinner, you don't want the waiter to come tell you about how backed up the kitchen is. And this is actually not our best chef that's on tonight. The other guy's better, right? Like you don't want to hear all of that. You just bring me my delicious meal and entertain me, right? Yeah. But it's in some ways, it's over the decades, we have to start to expose them to really what we do because it's created a devaluing in the service that we provide. Yeah. All right. Your fact number 3, I'm actually going to skip because you talked about outside MLS, which we just did a whole study on. So the 4th fact was, and this is actually to me the most important one, at least for a almost 26-year residential real estate guy who's sat in conference rooms and dining rooms and living rooms with clients. Home buyers highly value a knowledgeable and professional buyer's agent. Tell us the statistics and what you discovered as you went through this and as you dug in on this.
Yeah, and so just because I know you love the data, Keith, so this was a different study, and we sort of pulled it in because we thought it was part of the narrative that we'd been hearing, and we wanted to bring our research out. We'd been talking about this value of buyer's agent research. We conducted a focus group with a group of 110 recent home buyers and renters from across the country. So unlike a big million record sample that's representative, right? We were trying to do a deep dive, and you can't do a deep dive with a million people. So we did a deep dive with 110 people. And there'd been all sorts of surveys out there about whether people like their real estate agent or whether they would recommend them. But we really wanted to get into this, like, what do people value? And how can we translate that into some like value proposition messaging? This is back in December. And so what we found from this group that, again, nationwide, all ages, all backgrounds, was that people really think it's important that buyers have representation. That was the main point. And the second main point is agents and brokers don't do a good job talking about their value. Yeah. Those are the 2 key takeaways. Yeah. And then we can talk more about the specifics about what consumers want to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, the NAR puts out the home buyer report.
Right.
If you combine the 2 positive answers, more than 90% of the people either agree or strongly agree that they would use their real estate agent again, right?
Right.
So they've had a pleasurable experience. They've seen the value that was provided when asked the question. Do you have a trend line for this? This is a recent report, I think, on this specific. Is this something you're going to continue to track and
I'd like to.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just did it once. We just did it the one time, and focus groups are expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting. Just adding context to that. So Brian Boero, 1000 Watts, good friend of ours, and he'll be on the pod coming up again.
Friend of the pod.
Had a statistic. The number's going to be slightly off, but it's close. It was something like they did a consumer study just tracking how many people had actually even heard of the lawsuits in consumers, and it was like 33% or 36% of people have actually heard about it. The comment being that we need to just not everybody's watching the news, and we also need to start controlling the narrative, which is why I wanted this. And thank you for being on here again.
Yeah,
we want this. It's not a narrative. We want the facts to come out, and then I do believe that it's our responsibility as an industry to start sharing this stuff with people and go, no, look, here's an actual analysis done so you have context to it. It's not biased. This is literally a million records were looked at. Like, this is what you need to know, so that we can start shepherding people into these decisions transparently. And I think it's so important. And I'll do another little comment. So I've been talking with some insurance carriers. I'm planning to try and get one of them on here, but trying to get an insurance company to come talk about stuff is really hard. There's a lot of concern on their side right now, and I will leave names out of it because I've talked to many about unrepresented buyers in a real estate transaction and the increase of dual agency. they were very clear, and I have statistics I'll share at some point on the percentage of claims goes up significantly when it's dual agency. And the E&O carriers don't like the fact that an unrepresented buyer is buying a property, because if it ends up in a claim, it's a really fascinating comment. They go, we don't have another insurance carrier to split the claim with, so we have to eat all of that.
You're eating the
whole thing. And the guy goes, and I can guarantee you what's going to happen here. We're going to dump those costs right down on the brokerages. So like E&O coverage costs are going to go skyrocketing with this. It was just the ripple effect of all of these things are.
Tune into the pod for more good news.
So, well, all right. We only have we always end on one question, but I just want to just pin this in. So 2 studies basically summarized on MLS is extraordinarily important for the seller to get the highest price possible for their home.
Yep.
Not much else to say other than you have the stats to show it. You guys can read it in our notes if you want to read the study. But it was between 13 to 17% across the data that you looked at. And then the second thing is that you haven't been able to find anything about steering in the data as well from what you looked at.
That's correct.
I'll add one piece before I ask you the final question we ask every guest. If you're listening to this, I know that you aren't sitting at your desk or driving through your city going, ooh, I can't wait to read economic report. You have done a wonderful job. You and your team have done a wonderful job at packaging this in a very digestible way. This is not a 450-page economic report. I'm sure if you wanted it, Lisa could provide something like that, but they have boiled this down to its essence, and this should be part of the conversation that you are having with sellers.
100%.
There are statistics and data in here that should be part of your listing consultation and probably your buyer consultation, quite honestly. This is important that you digest this. I know we don't all love to read, and we don't certainly all love to read economic reports. Please take the time to click the link in the show notes. It's worth it. All right. Last question. If you were an agent or a brokerage, what's the one thing you would implement today to help your business in 2024?
Well, so I really do think it's all about communication. I think that there's I'm a researcher. I love data, but I think that, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure, there's no shortage of data out there. I think, analysis maybe we're a little short on, but there's no shortage of data out there. But I would really think hard about sort of how you're talking about your value, how you're talking about your firm's value, how you're talking to consumers in words that they want to hear, right? I think one of the interesting things from our focus group was, buyers and sellers don't want a friend out there. They don't want a buddy. They want a professional with expertise, and they want you to talk about that expertise. So I would just, rethink how you're, sharing that information about your expertise and your knowledge, because that's what people are really interested in hearing about.
So fewer TikTok dances, more thoughtful.
Well, everybody loves a good TikTok dance.
I didn't say zero. I just said fewer.
Okay.
I just said fewer. Okay. Yeah. Lisa, this has been so great.
It's been awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for unpacking all of this for us. It's
and
needed
just
work.
We're reserving you now, just to be clear, but when those new studies come out, we'd love to have you back on and share some of this data with the viewers and listeners. And we appreciate you doing those studies for our industry and advocating for it and making sure the truth comes out. So thanks again for being here. We look forward to having you back.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, guys, for talking about it. I really appreciate the chance to talk with your
All right.
Thanks,
talk to
Lisa.
you soon. It's our job to say out loud what everybody's only thinking to themselves. It's your job to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode.